The laugh echoed across the desert ridge, sharp and condescending. But the mocking sound was cut short as their helmets shattered like glass, and the laughter turned to screams. Sergeant Jack, Hawker's son, crouched low behind the cracked concrete wall, his eyes scanning the horizon. Ascaris was a wasteland, endless dunes of sand and scattered ruins, remnants of a planet once teeming with life. Now, it was nothing more than a battleground. The harsh winds whipped sand into his face, but he barely felt it. His focus was entirely on the ridge in the distance, where the enemy was coming. "You seeing them, Hawk?" whispered Corporal Rios, his voice crackling over the comms. Hawk didn't need to reply. The silhouette of the Zorathian advance team was unmistakable, their towering figures cutting through the heatwaves like ghosts. They were out there, just beyond the ridge, and they were coming for the outpost. The Zorathian consulate didn't take prisoners, either you stood your ground, or you were swept aside. "They're close," Hawk muttered, almost to himself. "Get ready." Rios adjusted his sniper rifle, settling into his prone position on the roof. He was good, damn good. Hawk had seen him take down targets from miles away with precision, but today was different. Today, the enemy wasn't just a distant blur. Today, they were fighting for their survival. The humans had no choice but to hold the line. If they failed, Ascaris would fall. If Ascaris fell, the rest of humanity's foothold in this sector was gone. "Movement, 10 o'clock, came a voice from Corporal Dalton, their demolition expert. He was perched behind an abandoned APC, his fingers twitching over the detonator in his hand. "We have them in our sights." Hawk nodded, his jaw tightening. This wasn't a time for hesitation. The Zorathians were a relentless force, advanced technology, superior tactics, and overwhelming firepower. But Hawk had something they didn't. Humans fought with a savagery and ingenuity that no alien race could predict. And he'd be damned if he let them take this outpost. "Remember your training," Hawk barked, his voice calm yet authoritative. "This is a long shot. Stick to the plan, hold your positions, and stay sharp." His team was more than just soldiers. They were a well-oiled machine. Every one of them had proven themselves in the field. Still, Hawk couldn't afford to take anything for granted. He adjusted the straps of his combat vest, feeling the weight of his weapon settle into place. The enemy was closing in fast. Through his scope, Hawk could see them now, 4 Zorathian officers. They stood on the ridge, their grotesque figures nearly camouflaged against the orange sky. But the gleam of their helmets gave them away. They stood tall, their posture arrogant, like they were already claiming victory. Hawk could feel the anger simmering in his gut. "Target the officers first," Hawk ordered. "Rios, take out the lead. Dalton, ready the charge on the left flank. The rest of you, prepare for a hot extraction once we engage." The team acknowledged with a series of tight affirmations. Hawk exhaled slowly, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. His mind wasn't focused on fear. It was focused on one thing: survival. He'd been through enough firefights to know that panic was a killer. There was only the mission, and the humans who depended on him. "Rios, on my mark. Take the shot." Rios didn't respond. He didn't need to. His focus was absolute. Hawk's eyes never left the ridge as the seconds stretched out. The officers, oblivious to the trap, continued their march. Hawk could see their mouths moving as they spoke, though the words were too far away to hear. Their arrogance was palpable. They were laughing, mocking even, as if the human resistance was a joke to them. 3, 2, 1, mark! The crack of Rios's sniper rifle shattered the silence. A blur of motion. The lead Zorathian officer's head exploded, his helmet shattering like glass, the alien's body crumpling to the ground. But that was just the beginning. The remaining officers froze, their heads snapping toward the source of the shot. But it was too late. Dalton's charge detonated, sending a wave of fire and debris across the left flank. The shockwave rippled through the ground, toppling Zorathian soldiers. But Hawk knew it wouldn't be enough to stop them all. Zorathians were tough, too tough. "Dalton! Fall back to the secondary line!" Hawk shouted as the team scrambled into position. They couldn't afford to stay put. The Zorathians were already regrouping, their shock troops charging forward. Hawk's team had the advantage for now, but the Zorathians would adapt quickly. "Cover me!" Dalton yelled as he sprinted to the secondary barricade, his explosive charges already deployed. The man was fearless, and his commitment was unwavering. But even Dalton knew that the enemy was relentless. As Hawk took cover behind the remains of a crashed drone, he watched the Zorathian officers advance, their black and silver armor reflecting the sunlight as they closed in. They had now learned the humans weren't an easy target. They were going to pay for every step forward. "Fall back to the bunker!" Hawk ordered, realizing the need to regroup. It was only a matter of time before the Zorathians pushed them into a corner. They had to be prepared. As the team retreated into the narrow corridors of the bunker, Hawk took one last look at the battlefield. The ridge was now lined with enemy soldiers, but their laughter had stopped. Their confidence had faltered. They knew something was wrong. The humans had just given them a glimpse of what they were capable of, but Hawk wasn't fooled. This was only the beginning. The real fight was about to begin. "Hawk, we're not going down without a fight, are we?" Rios asked, his voice low as he reloaded his rifle. Hawk turned, meeting Rios's gaze. "Not while I'm breathing, we're not." The Zorathians might have had numbers, technology, and superior firepower. But they didn't have one thing the humans did: resolve. And on Ascaris, that would make all the difference. The line had been drawn, and Hawk wasn't about to let it be crossed. The battle for humanity's survival was just getting started. The underground bunker was a maze of concrete walls and dim lights, but to Hawk, it felt like the only safe place left on Ascaris. The rumble of explosions echoed from above as Zorathian forces pressed their assault on the human outpost. Hawk's team had fallen back into their secondary defensive position, but the reality was sinking in. They were running out of time. They had only one option: fight to the last. "How long can we hold them off?" Rios asked, his voice tense as he crouched beside Hawk, scanning the battlefield through a small slit in the bunker's reinforced wall. Hawk didn't reply immediately. He knew the odds were against them. The Zorathians had deployed their shock troops, an elite force designed to tear through any resistance. They had overwhelming firepower, advanced technology, and no mercy. But what they didn't have was the same fire that burned in the hearts of Hawk and his team. Humanity was fighting for its future, and that was something no alien force could take from them easily. "We hold them as long as we can," Hawk muttered, his fingers drumming against his weapon. "We're not backing down. Not now." The bunker trembled as another wave of blasts rocked the surface above them. The Zorathians were relentless. Every explosion seemed to get closer, every minute more critical. Hawk could feel the pressure weighing on him. He needed to come up with something, anything, to turn the tide. "Dalton!" Hawk barked, turning to their demolition expert. "How much time do we have before they breach the surface?" Dalton wiped the sweat off his brow, his eyes scanning the countdown on his portable comms unit. "We've got 20 minutes tops, before they punch through. The charge on the front door won't hold forever." Hawk's mind raced. They had to buy time. The Zorathians would send their heavier forces in soon, troopers in reinforced exoskeletons, plasma weapons at the ready. But if Hawk and his team could distract them long enough, maybe they could lure them into a trap. The bunker itself was their best defense, but it was also their coffin if they didn't act. "Rios, you and I will take the high ground. Dalton, set up those charges along the east perimeter. If they come through there, we'll make sure they wish they hadn't," Hawk ordered, his voice cool but commanding. "The rest of you, get the backup radios ready. We need extraction if things go south." The team acknowledged, and within moments they were moving. The sound of clattering gear and weapons filled the bunker as the team suited up and gathered their gear. Hawk could feel the weight of their expectations. He had to keep them alive. Failure wasn't an option. Outside, the roar of the Zorathian offensive was deafening. As Hawk and Rios ascended a narrow, spiraling staircase to the upper observation deck, the reality of their situation hit him like a fist to the gut. The landscape outside had become a battlefield, sand, dust, and fire mixing in a chaotic symphony. The sky above was streaked with the trails of enemy artillery, dark shapes moving in and out of sight. "They're coming," Rios said, his voice grim as he lowered his sniper rifle. "A full battalion, Hawk." Hawk nodded, adjusting his helmet. "Get ready." The first wave of Zorathians appeared over the ridge, their towering forms silhouetted against the firestorm behind them. Hawk squinted through his scope, trying to pick out the officers. He saw them, 4 of them, advancing in a tight formation. They were moving quickly, marching with purpose. Their laughter from earlier was replaced by a cold, calculating silence. They knew they were winning. "Take the shot when I give the signal," Hawk ordered. His eyes locked on the lead officer. The bastard was arrogant. He had no idea what was coming. As the Zorathians closed the gap, Hawk's fingers tightened around his rifle. His breathing was steady. Calm. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He knew Rios would take the shot with deadly precision, but only if he could get the angle. The officers were about to enter the kill zone. Just then, a crackle came over the comms, breaking the momentary silence. "Hawk, this is Dalton. We've got a problem." Hawk's heart skipped a beat. "What's the situation?" "They're onto us. The Zorathians, they know we're here," Dalton said, his voice tight. "They've set up some sort of electronic jamming. I'm getting interference on the detonators." Hawk swore under his breath. The Zorathians had adapted too quickly. They weren't just coming to wipe them out. They were actively trying to neutralize their best weapons. Hawk glanced over at Rios. The sniper had a grim look on his face. "Their jamming is stopping us from triggering the charges," Dalton continued. "We've only got one shot at this, Hawk. If I can't blow those charges on the east perimeter, we're done for." "Then we'll improvise," Hawk said, a plan already forming in his mind. "Rios, take the shot when you have the chance. We'll need the distraction. Dalton, get to the control room. Disable that jammer. The rest of you, stay sharp." Rios didn't respond, but Hawk saw him nod, his eyes narrowing as he aimed down the scope. Hawk could see the Zorathian officers now, their forms getting closer, closer. He could hear the faint hum of their advanced weapons, the low whine of the plasma energy charging up. "Rios, now!" Hawk commanded. The shot rang out, sharp and clean. The lead officer's head snapped back, his helmet splitting into shards. But there was no immediate panic from the enemy. They had expected the humans to strike, and they were already moving to counter. Hawk's instincts kicked in. "Dalton, now!" With a leap, Dalton raced for the control room. The sound of plasma fire erupted as the Zorathians began to return fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness like artificial lightning. Rios was already taking down another officer, but Hawk knew this was a losing battle. The Zorathians were pushing in, undeterred. "Get to the backup plan!" Hawk shouted over the comms, his voice booming with urgency. He had to trust his team to pull through. Rios's rifle barked again, but Hawk could see the tide shifting. The Zorathians were pushing forward with greater speed now. Hawk scanned the area, looking for an opening, anything that could change the momentum. And then it hit him, an unexpected blow. From the corner of his eye, Hawk caught a flash of light. A streak of plasma, so bright it nearly blinded him, slashed through the air. It hit the bunker's outer wall, and for a moment, everything went still. Then the tremors came. The Zorathians had made their move. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was an invasion. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to win. The ground shook as another wave of plasma fire hit the bunker, and Hawk knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for everything humanity had worked for on Ascaris. And the worst was yet to come. The walls of the bunker groaned under the constant assault. Every blast, every shockwave, sent vibrations through the steel and concrete that held them together. Hawk's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. The Zorathians were pushing harder now, their weapons louder, their tactics more organized. They weren't going to stop until the last human was wiped from the surface of Ascaris. Dalton, status! Hawk shouted over the noise of gunfire, his voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. I'm in position, came Dalton's voice, strained but determined. The jammer's still active, but I've rigged up a secondary charge. If I can trigger it from here, we'll have a shot at disabling their communications. Good, Hawk replied. Do it. We need every advantage. The jamming signal was preventing Hawk from coordinating with the rest of his team as effectively as he'd like. Every move they made seemed to be countered before it could fully play out. The Zorathians had adapted too fast. But the moment Dalton's charge went off, the tables could turn. That was their chance, the one and only shot they had left. Through the cracked windows, Hawk could see the advancing Zorathian soldiers lining up, their armored forms casting long shadows on the sand-strewn battlefield. They were relentless, without a hint of hesitation. The officers had already fallen, but the rest of their army had come in force. It didn't matter to them that they had lost their commanders. The Zorathians had one goal: eradicate humanity. Hawk, we've got incoming! Rios's voice crackled through the calms, frantic. Big ones. They're heavy infantry. I don't know how much longer we can hold out. Hawk glanced up just as a massive Zorathian exoskeleton appeared on the horizon. It was a behemoth, twice the size of a man, its armor thick and nearly indestructible. The plasma cannon on its shoulder hummed with power, ready to obliterate anything in its path. Damn! Hawk muttered under his breath. Dalton, don't wait for me. Detonate the charge now! There was a pause, a brief moment of hesitation that felt like an eternity. Then Dalton's voice, calm yet filled with urgency. It's done! A second later, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble with the force of the explosion. Hawk watched as a plume of smoke and fire rose from the east perimeter. The jamming signal flickered and vanished, followed by a crackle of static. Hawk's calms were suddenly clear. His heart surged with renewed hope. This is it, Hawk said, barely audible. Rios, take them down? Rios didn't hesitate. His sniper rifle cracked through the air, and the first of the Zorathian soldiers fell. Then another. And another. But the heavy infantry was closing in fast. The behemoth exoskeletons marched toward the bunker, their enormous legs shaking the earth with every step. Hawk knew they couldn't outlast this assault. Their only chance was to make the Zorathians believe they had a surprise in store. They needed to stall them long enough to trigger the secondary fallback plan, a series of mines buried under the desert floor, ready to detonate with devastating force. But getting to them would be a suicide mission if they didn't move quickly. Dalton, can you make it to the secondary charges? Hawk asked, his eyes fixed on the oncoming exoskeletons. I can, Dalton replied, already moving. But I'll need cover. I'll cover you. Rios, keep picking them off. Don't let them get close. Hawk's hand gripped his rifle tightly as he took position by the reinforced bunker door. His team had performed miracles so far, but this was different. The odds were too high, and the Zorathians' response was quicker than anticipated. They were adapting too fast, learning from every move Hawk and his team made. Hawk's mind raced, but he kept his focus. The plan was set. He watched Dalton sprint out of the bunker, dodging plasma shots that exploded around him. His movements were swift, calculated. Dalton was the kind of man who could move like a ghost when needed, but even he couldn't outrun the incoming fire forever. Dalton! Hawk barked, his voice tight with tension. I'm almost there, came the reply, strained. Suddenly, a heavy explosion echoed through the air, followed by the shrill whine of incoming fire. Hawk's heart skipped a beat as he watched Dalton take a hit. The explosion was too close. Dalton stumbled but kept moving, his hands gripping the remote detonator with grim determination. Dalton! Hawk shouted again, his voice hoarse with urgency. Dalton's body hit the ground, but his hand was still on the detonator. Hawk's breath caught in his chest. He couldn't lose Dalton. Not now. Dalton, if you're still alive, hit that damn button! Hawk yelled, his hands tightening around his weapon. Dalton's voice came through the comms, weak but clear. It's done. You're good to go, Hawk. For a split second, Hawk froze. Then, everything erupted into chaos. The ground shuddered as a chain of explosions tore through the desert. The secondary charges detonated in a violent series of blasts, tearing through the Zorathian ranks like paper. The exoskeletons faltered, their massive frames staggering as the shockwaves of the explosions threw them off balance. "Go! Now!" Hawk shouted, his heart hammering in his chest. Rios was already moving, picking off any remaining soldiers with quick, precise shots. Hawk charged forward, his rifle raised, the adrenaline fueling his every step. He couldn't afford to think about the cost of this victory. He had to keep his team alive. The surviving Zorathian infantry scrambled, their heavy weapons firing wildly, but the damage was done. Hawk's team had given them a glimpse of what it meant to face humanity in a fight. And the Zorathians had underestimated them. Hawk reached the first exoskeleton, his rifle blazing. Plasma rounds impacted the beast's chest, but its armor barely buckled. Then, with a final, desperate push, Hawk swung his combat knife upward, piercing the exposed joints beneath the exoskeleton's armored plates. The Zorathian inside screamed in agony as the mech collapsed, its systems short-circuiting. The battle wasn't over, but humanity had shown the invaders that they weren't invincible. They had taken a beating, yes, but they had struck back with a fury no one had expected. Hawk looked around at his team, bruised, battered but alive. They had won this round. For now, it was enough. "Dalton, get back inside," Hawk said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We live to fight another day." Dalton limped toward the bunker, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You bet your ass we do." They had held their ground. And though the war was far from over, Hawk knew one thing: as long as humanity had the will to fight, the Zorathians would never take Ascaris. The aftermath of the explosion left the battlefield in a haunting silence. The once raging storm of plasma fire, the thunderous crack of exoskeletons crashing to the ground, and the desperate cries of soldiers had faded. Now, the air hung thick with dust, the ground littered with the wreckage of both human and Zorathian machines. The echo of war still vibrated in Hawk's bones, but in the eerie stillness, something else began to take root: fear. "Rios, report." Hawk's voice cut through the quiet. His pulse still raced from the intensity of the battle, but he had to focus. He had to know if they were truly safe, or if the worst was yet to come. Rios's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with exhaustion but steady. "We're clear on this end. The Zorathian infantry's broken. A few stragglers are trying to regroup, but they're scattered. They won't be a problem." Hawk allowed himself a brief breath, but only a brief one. The victory was hard won, but it was still only a small piece of the larger puzzle. The real threat still loomed. "Dalton?" Hawk called out, turning to the demolition expert, who was pacing back and forth, his face drawn and fatigued. "Everything's rigged and ready, Hawk," Dalton replied, giving him a brief nod, though his eyes kept darting toward the horizon. The secondary charges had done their job, but there was still a sense of unease hanging in the air. "I'll stay on standby if they decide to make another push. But we need to move fast. The Zorathians won't let this humiliation slide. They'll be back with everything they've got." "I know," Hawk said, his tone hardening. "But we've bought ourselves some time. We're not just defending anymore. It's time to go on the offensive. We can't wait for them to strike first again." He turned to face his team, locking eyes with each of them in turn. The weight of his words settled between them. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about taking control. Hawk knew the stakes had been raised. The Zorathians would be enraged. And there was no more room for doubt. "Rios, you and Dalton take the West Ridge. Get eyes on their reinforcements. They'll be trying to send a counterattack, and we need to see it coming. The rest of us will hold here and keep our position fortified. We're not letting them regroup." "Understood," Rios replied with a grim nod, his sniper rifle slung over his shoulder. He moved off without another word, Dalton falling in beside him, his gear heavy but purposeful. Hawk's gaze followed them for a moment, then turned back to the perimeter. The bunker was still standing, but it wasn't much more than a shadow of its former self. There were cracks in the concrete, scorched earth around the entrances, and the remnants of Zorathian mech strewn across the battlefield. But the ground was theirs, for now. The team worked quickly, fortifying what they could. They had to prepare for a fight that was coming whether they liked it or not. Hawk checked his weapon, then looked toward the horizon, where the smoke from the explosions still curled lazily into the sky. His mind raced, weighing their chances, their options. The Zorathians had a fleet at their disposal, and Hawk knew they wouldn't risk another prolonged engagement. This last skirmish had shown them the strength of humanity's resolve. It would be a personal matter now. They had to crush any chance of resistance, and that meant sending in their best. Hawk wasn't sure how much longer they could survive if the Zorathians sent a full-scale attack. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crackle from his comms. "Hawk!" Dalton's voice came through, sounding urgent. "You're going to want to see this." Without hesitation, Hawk snapped his comms into his ear, listening intently. "What's going on?" "I've got eyes on their fleet," Dalton said, his voice grim. "They're not just bringing in reinforcements. They're coming in full force. Heavy bombers, capital ships, they're preparing for orbital bombardment. If they go through with it, this entire base is gone." Hawk's stomach dropped. An orbital bombardment wasn't just an attack, it was an extermination. The Zorathians would wipe them off the map with no hesitation. He didn't have time to waste. "Are we in range?" Hawk asked quickly, his mind calculating. The base's defense systems were strong, but they weren't enough to stop a full-scale bombardment from space. "No," Dalton replied. "But they will be soon. You've got maybe an hour or two tops. If they fire those bombardment cannons, we're done for." Hawk's pulse spiked. An hour. That was all they had left. "All right, listen up," Hawk said, addressing the rest of his team as they gathered near the control center. His voice was steady, though inside he was anything but. "We need to move now. Dalton, get to the communications array and disable their targeting systems. We can't let them lock onto this base. Everyone else, get ready. We're going to fight with everything we have. The Zorathians think they've got us on the ropes, but we're going to show them what happens when you underestimate humanity." Rios's voice came over the comms, calm and ready. "We're in position, Hawk. Ready to do some damage." "Good," Hawk said. "Let's make them regret the day they ever set foot on this planet." Dalton's hands flew across the control panel, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The task was massive. Disrupting an orbital bombardment was no small feat. If he failed, there would be no second chance. Seconds felt like hours as the team prepared for the inevitable. Hawk stood at the center of the bunker, eyes locked on the war-torn horizon. He could feel the heat of the moment closing in around him, the pressure mounting with every passing second. The Zorathians were relentless, but humanity's fire was far from extinguished. The comms crackled again. "Dalton here," came the voice, strained but victorious. "Targeting systems are offline. They won't be able to fire for the next 30 minutes. Hawk's chest tightened with relief, but he knew they couldn't waste this advantage. "All right, everyone move. Rios, take out those stragglers. The rest of us, we hold the line. This is the moment we take back control." The team moved in unison, a well-oiled machine honed by their shared mission. The Zorathians might have had superior firepower, superior numbers, but humanity had something far more dangerous: the will to survive. Hawk knew that as long as they stood together, there was nothing the invaders could throw at them that they couldn't fight back. The countdown was on. The final battle for Ascaris was just beginning.